Welcome back, listeners, to another segment of the Neurodiverse Couples Coaches Corner. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Stephanie Holmes. I am in a neurodiverse Christian marriage, and I am happy to be joined with me, my co-host, Barbara Grant.
Hi, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. Happy to be back. I'm also a neurodiverse couples coach working with both couples, individuals, and even their adult children at times. And we are thrilled to have a guest with us, one of our colleagues that both of us have met within the last year and a half, and gotten to know. She then actually goes to my church, which is such a great thing because we get to hang out and talk a lot. Jana Smith. And when I met Jana, she was right away interested in the neurodiverse coaching work I was doing. She has been a coach for many years. She'll be telling you about that. And she has now transitioned a large portion of her coaching practice to service and help neurodivergent people, of which she is one. So I am just going to toss it to you, Jana, let you introduce yourself, and then we will come back to us and we'll talk about what we're going to talk about today.
Great. Thank you, Barbara and Stephanie, for having me. So my name is Jana. I'm a resilience coach. And what that means is I help people build resilience by working on nervous system regulation. So there's educational pieces, coaching pieces, and lots of different tools that people can use to build their resilience and work on their nervous system. And I've been coaching for about 10 years. And it was only about 3 years ago that I realized that I'm neurodivergent with my diagnosis of ADHD. And I was able to see a huge correlation between a neurodivergent brain and the propensity to dysregulate. So all of the tools that I'd already learned and been using, it made sense why I needed them in the first place and why they benefited me so much and helped me to be healthy and resilient myself.
While we see a lot of dysregulation in the neurodivergent population, neurotypicals, if you have anxiety, if you've had trauma, if you've had chronic pain, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons that our brain just starts to go, maybe it was functioning at a higher level and now something's happened and we become dysregulated. So if you are, whatever your neurotype is today, I think you're going to get something from this podcast. So can we start with your story and how you got into this? And then Barb, I'm going to let you kind of lead with some of the other questions since the two of y'all have had more. I'm kind of a bystander listener who might have a question, every once in a while, because some of the terms we were talking about before we started recording, I was like, yes, I want to know more about that too. And y'all make sure we talk about where you guys have your recordings at, because y'all have gone in some deeper discussions about this, and then people are interested in them and want them to find those other things. So Barb, this was kind of your idea. I mean, I know I've met you, Jana, and I love you, Jana, and I send clients to you all the time. But Barb, this was your kind of discussion point. Why is this so important for us to discuss today in our Coaches Corner?
Thanks, Stephanie. So we have, of course, as Jana said, seen dysregulation as a big part of the obstacles that neurodivergent people and their neurotypical partners are facing. There's a lot of trauma in terms of relational triggers, and there's a lot of sparks and napalm that flies before anybody realizes what's happening or how to begin to control it. And both of us have an approach, Stephanie, where we start with the couple separately. I have a whole thing about being in space and grace, meaning calm down. But getting people to calm down or helping them calm down is sometimes a challenge. So when I met Jana and realized what it is she does, which is how to help people dial into their neurology and what's happening in terms of their sensitive neuro triggers and how to identify and work with that. And I was so impressed. I decided to take a course of hers. And I learned so much, many things that I've brought forward into my coaching practice. But for the heavy lifting, I send everybody to Jana. So as things evolved, there's been something that's, called rejection sensitive dysphoria, which a lot of people are throwing around that term in this field of neurodiversity. First of all, it's very poorly researched. There is no clinical description or substantial, this is what it is and why. And it's something that a lot of people who are traumatized identify with. And Jana's going to talk more about why that is. But because I get it, and you too, Stephanie, we get this kind of served up to us like, I have or my husband has rejection sensitive dysphoria. He won't listen to me. I just raise an eyebrow and it triggers him. And it's a sort of deep pain and triggered response in the sense that you perceive rejection, not even that rejection's really coming to you. You're kind of got a real negative, I am going to be rejected bias. You're often negatively rejecting yourself as well when you have rumination and negative thoughts. Mm-hmm. So I thought I would sit down with Jana and have some discussions about, what is this? Do you think it's a thing? Where does it come from? How can we talk about helping people with this? And is it part of just dysregulation? What up? So, and because she's neurodivergent, I thought maybe she has some personal experience with this. So I'm just going to give that to you right now, Jana, and I'll ask some more questions as we go. But what do you think when I came to you? What were your thoughts and how has it evolved for you in our conversation about this?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest underlying piece that it's important to understand is rejection sensitivity dysphoria is more tied to dysregulation in the brain than it is tied to neurodiversity or a particular relationship dynamic. And that is because when the brain has any kind of a trauma response or it goes into dysregulation or what Dr. Jim Wilder calls enemy mode, the brain has basically decided it's no longer safe in the world in general. Sort of there's an underlying lack of safety. And so in order to cope with that, because the brain is all about keeping us safe, that's one of its primary unconscious driving forces. So the brain will then, in response to feeling perceived threat, start to look for everything in the environment and everything around it and anything relational that could confirm that indeed we're under threat. And so if the brain gets into that mode, then it's very sensitive to all the perceptions around it. It adopts a negative lens and begins to filter things as though they were more threatening or worse or more negative than they are in reality. Now, I want to pause for a second and validate the fact that if you're experiencing this rejection sensitivity, that's not made up. It's a real felt sense in the brain and body. So we're not saying you're making it up or you're exaggerating. It's all an unconscious automatic process that happens in the brain. However, once we understand that it's happening in the brain and it's because the brain doesn't feel safe, we can step outside of that and say, what do I want to do about it? Rather than feeling like we're a victim of it and need to avoid it and train everyone around us to behave in a way where we can feel safe. The reality is we can't train everyone in our environment to make us feel safe because variables always change. And if we're hypervigilant around avoiding it, we will actually become more sensitive over time. So it's a losing battle, and it's better to take back empowerment and an internal locus of control and say, okay, I see what's happening here. What can I do about it?
Oh, that's excellent. Let me recap to make sure I'm tracking. So rejection sensitive dysphoria, as it's being buzzed around the world in the circles of neurodiversity, is actually, in all our collective opinions, heightened dysregulation, a feature of a dysregulated, apprehensive kind of fear, looking for the lion coming out of the bushes brain that is going to perceive threat or has trained itself to perceive threat, even if there's only a hint or a previous experience with threat. It's a interpretation of reality from a very negative bias that is all about keeping themselves safe. Is that right?
Yes. And it's important to note it's not your fault. You don't choose it. There's nothing you necessarily could have done to prevent that. But the brain is a pattern recognition machine. So it's going to look for patterns. And if something didn't feel good, then it'll work really hard to get you to avoid that in the future. So unless you bring awareness to it and understand that, it will just keep rolling. So None of us want this. None of us invite it. Yeah. But it happens. Yes, Stephanie.
So on the two spaces, if you've repeatedly been traumatized by the same relationship, you might also see smaller things as bigger things because my brain is like wrong spotting anything that this person could be doing that could be a threat, kind of like a knee injury. I got it, had an injury, I got it set, but now it's kind of sensitive and you don't even have to touch it hardly, and it's going to be in pain because it remembers the pain. So if I'm traumatized or repeatedly traumatized, I'm looking to see where there could be trauma. And if I'm neurodivergent and already have a system that's heightened anyway, because we know the amygdala is bigger, and people have heard, and so there's already a looking for threat or perceived threat. Now you've got two dysregulated people together, no matter what their neurotype is, and we've got a lot of dysregulation in the air. What does that even do, like, to the atmosphere, the vibe? Let's just say two parents are dysregulated in the house. What's the vibe there in that family system?
Sure. Well, the unconscious neural firing that's then happening is it's kind of not safe all the time. So, that's going to feed off, the two will feed off each other, but then if there are children, they will also feed off that as well. And again, this all happens unconsciously. We don't walk into the room and go, I'm going to be sensitive today. If they look at me funny or raise their eyebrow, I'm going to react to that. It all happens, it bypasses our conscious awareness. So again, it can kind of become a pattern that feeds and grows on its own unless we step back and intervene.
Well, I think what you're saying is hugely important. And Stephanie, I'm glad you're bringing up the fact that both neurotype partners can be participating in this negative vibe, this apprehensiveness, this what we call walking on eggshells kind of environment. That certainly bleeds down to the family at large and even friends of the family, extended family. So I think, we've already said it's dysregulation, and one person can make a difference in their own choices about how they're going to attenuate to correcting this or reprogramming for it, right? We can't control the behavior of the other. We can remove ourselves from stuff that we can't handle. But if we keep rehearsing deepening our apprehension and deepening negative responses in terms of what we do in that place of fear, we're just getting into a deeper rut, and the problem becomes even more insurmountable. So, talk a little bit about the dynamic of what it means to retrain your thinking, retrain your emotions, retrain your behavior, this take off, put on, what do we want to become, and how to practice that. And I know a lot of your work deals with that, and share what you can about that.
Yeah. Well, first step for engaging in any process is slowing down, because the automatic processes of the reactive part of the brain happen so quickly. So we can't necessarily prevent them at first until we've done a lot of repatterning work. But if we slow down when we're feeling triggered and take a breath and pause and give ourselves some space, that will allow the wise thinking part of the brain to catch up. And then we can begin to bring in more perspectives. So part of it is cognitive, part of it is rehearsing different emotions. Another component is asking ourselves what other narratives are true, because the brain will cling to one narrative quickly and automatically, but that may not be the whole story. That may not be the pattern with this individual. We might be pulling it in from the past. That may not be the case every single time, but our brain wants to say, oh no, here we go again. So some of it is just bringing in other information. And then there's also some ways that we can get at the nervous system somatically. So there are exercises and body-based tools that we can use that act back on the brain to invite it toward regulation. And then, more recently, I'm training and becoming certified to offer brain spotting, which is another really great somatic tool to get at the midbrain and bypass the conscious awareness to help repattern the way the brain is reacting.
Well, that's so exciting. And it's such a nascent, emerging frontier of trauma work, neuroscience, understanding how the brain has been functioning and what people can do to calm their brains down. So, and along those lines, I know there's ketamine. A lot of people are going for ketamine treatments, and under the influence of ketamine are doing cognitive behavioral therapy work, and it has a positive, longer lasting impact. But I want to talk about that brain spotting, because in a private conversation, you and I talked about this, and you told me about it a few months back, that you had this experience in treatment yourself with a trained therapist and a certified therapist for brain spotting. And talk to us about what happened to you, what the issue was that you were dealing with, what the results was, and why brain spotting got your attention.
Sure. So I'll go back a little bit in my history. Shortly after I had my kids, I became very ill and I was having a lot of headaches, chronic pain. I was in and out of bed, digestive issues. And we spent 7 to 10 years chasing our tails, trying to figure out what was going on. That process further dysregulated me over time. And also during that process, a lot of things that I was confused about or wanted to try, my husband was supportive, but somewhat skeptical. So I thought, well, maybe I'm really, really sensitive to gluten. Maybe I need to grow my own food. Lots of rabbit trails that some of them were helpful. Some of them were complete dead ends. But during that process, he, kind of stepped back somewhat and emotionally separated himself so that he wasn't on the roller coaster all the time. And that created a lot of trauma and sense of abandonment for me. So that put me in motion of having certain triggers and sensitivities around, patterns and behaviors. So one of the things that he did to step aside and refill his own cup was to go out in the wood shop or to go out in the yard and do lots and lots and lots of projects. And even though I have recovered and have a beautiful recovery and success story that, we can put a link to a more in-depth telling of that because we don't have time today. But in the end, as we healed and tried to put the pieces back together in our life, I found that I really struggled around time in the yard and time in the shop and my husband doing projects because it continued to be a trigger for me. So even when the balance tipped and he was spending more time with the family and I wasn't in reality abandoned, I still struggled with feeling those same feelings. And I did 3 years of talk therapy. I had done a full brain retraining program and then was working as a coach for that program. I tried a lot of things and then we had done some couples therapy. But it wasn't until I had 2 sessions of brain spotting myself individually with our couples therapist that I had this incredible breakthrough in this area. And brain spotting is actually quite simple. It uses places where we gaze with our eyes and helps that access the unconscious brain. And so there's a whole setup with bilateral music and some different pieces to it. But essentially, you work with, bringing up the trauma or the trigger, the sense of trigger, and then you use the supporting materials and the gaze spot to allow your brain to process at an unconscious level. And it kind of seemed too simple and a little too good to be true, but I was absolutely blown away at how after going through that process, then within a week, and your brain continues to repattern for days after you do this, that I had a completely different experience of being invited into the shop to see something that my husband had built. And instead of feeling frustrated, maybe that he wasn't spending time inside with the family, I actually burst into tears and bawled at how amazing it was what he was working on. So it was this complete rerouting of not only did I not feel negatively or neutral toward it, I developed an appreciation for his brain and how amazing it is what he can design. And it's something that's really important to him and a gift that he has. I had this opening up of this new capacity to be able to appreciate that. And the tears partly came from that and partly from just this relief of, wow, my brain is interacting with this in a completely different way. And what an incredible gift to both of us. So after that experience, I said, okay, that's it. I want to get trained in this because I work with clients around regulation and triggers, and sometimes we get stuck and sometimes my clients get stuck, and that can go on for a long time. And while there are other tools to help our brain create new patterning and new associations, a lot of them take time and quite a bit of work. And this is such a shortcut. I thought, how can I not try this out and offer this to my clients because I want them to have those kinds of experiences too.
Wow. Well, we certainly want to stay tuned to what you're doing with the brain spotting as you get certified, as you're beginning, in that certification process, working with clients and actually working with them with the technique is already something you're doing. So people, if they're interested, can reach out to you about that. And I think too that, what you're also describing is that you as the dysregulated person took the trouble to take responsibility to get healed about that. And you didn't legislate to your husband, if you don't stop doing projects, I'm leaving you. Or if you don't stop doing projects, I'm moving out. We have to separate. You were willing to own what was on your lane and what was within your capacity to heal. And, if you had gotten stuck calling it, I have rejection sensitive dysphoria and you can't do, that really would have set up a very no-win situation for you, for him, for everything. So, what is it? Talk to about how the specificity of understanding what the trigger is helpful in dealing with dysregulation in general.
Surprisingly, you don't have to know what all the causes of your triggers are in order to make huge amounts of progress. All you need to understand is, what does it feel like when I'm dysregulated? Can I start to catch that sooner? And how do I support myself in that? There are a lot of people that I've worked with over the years that don't even know what all their triggers are, but they're dysregulating so frequently. And so focusing on the trigger is actually sometimes not helpful, because that strengthens the association between the trigger and danger. So oftentimes the most success comes from turning our attention away from the trigger, because it's not actually about the trigger. It's about how our unconscious brain is reacting to whatever.
Right. And the last piece of that I want to comment on is, if somebody that you're in a relationship with is triggered to the point of becoming abusive or violent or verbally, lacerating you, that behavior is something we should move away from, right? We do have to discern what is a true invasion and what is truly unhealthy and hurtful, and what is the perceived hurt, or I'm just not getting enough of what I want. Like, you just didn't get enough time from him, or preference over his project, but he wasn't, in any way abusive in that process of asserting himself and doing his projects, right? So,
right. Yeah. I mean, and there were some growth areas and some boundaries that needed to be set on both sides, because it was very much out of balance. But the way that I was reacting to it and how I wanted to solve it wasn't the best outcome in the end.
Right. Exactly. So, Stephanie, what do you think about brain spotting now? Is that helpful in
yes,
bringing you up to speed?
I've had a couple of clients who've done it, and then they kind of come back to a session and I was like, okay, are we able to talk about that topic again? And someone saying, yeah, I did this brain spotting thing, and we've already had 2 conversations about it, and it hasn't been as dysregulating. It's really freeing. It's really weird seeing myself almost out. I feel like I'm outside of my body, seeing myself not getting dysregulated. That's, interesting. And I'm saying that it's not an out of body experience. Mm-hmm. Neither is it hypnosis. So anybody here is like, ooh, this sounds spooky, and this is not hypnosis.